very swampy day where the swamp is trying very hard to smear President Trump, to drag him down into it, but we're not going to let it happen. We're not going to let anything stop this movement, stop our president, and stop the reawakening of liberty and actual democracy and justice in this country that has been sweeping the nation since the president's election almost exactly 1 year ago. What we know today is that charges were filed against Paul Manafort and his deputy, Rick Gates. Alex broke those charges yesterday and actually on Saturday even. But of course, the mainstream media will not give him credit for the scoop, even though he broke out specifically the names of who would be charged today. First to do so, but of course, never given the credit from the mainstream media. We are also hearing indications that charges will be filed against other people associated either with the Trump campaign, such as General Flynn. There's a rumor going around about that, but I would classify it very much as a rumor before anything takes place, as well as charges potentially against the Podesta group, who Paul Manafort himself worked for while working with Ukraine. And now I want to also break down a little bit something about these charges on Paul Manafort, because you see, the left has spent the last, I don't know, year screaming Russia, 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 Russia at us. However, if you go through and read the actual indictment, and I've read all 31 pages of it, 12 counts, he pled not guilty. If you go and look at a map or read anywhere in the indictment, none of it has to do with Russia. The entire 12 counts have to do with either Ukraine or condos and different real estate properties that he has in different parts of the United States, New York, Florida, Virginia. So I don't know if CNN has ever seen a map or paid attention into what's going on in foreign policy for the last generation or so, but Ukraine is not part of Russia, and I've actually made a new geography guide for CNN that I'd like to put up for them so we can all go and double check. There's Russia, you can see Moscow, and then there just to the next part of it is not Russia. That is Ukraine. So CNN really has a lot of questions to answer for themselves, because they told us that all of this was about Russia. In fact, Mueller's mandate, his purview, is only to look into Trump connections with the Russian state and whether or not there was collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. That is why this investigation was brought up. That is why Mueller was hired. That is the specific purview of his investigation as handed to him by Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General. You're going to be breaking down a little bit about that here. But why was it then that the charges were brought dealing with Ukraine and yet nothing to do with Russia? And now they're going to try to paint it over by saying, oh, well, there were people in the Ukraine that were secretly working for Russia. So you see, it all leads back to Russia. But again, the charges have nothing to do specifically with Russia. So that is what we're left with today. This fiction, this fable, the Russian collusion delusion, as Roger Stone, a good colleague and friend of ours who was recently shut down by Twitter, likes to say, because that is what it's been all along. There was no Russian collusion between President Trump, his campaign, and the Russian state. There was no collusion between Trump and Russian intelligence. There was no collusion between Trump and Vladimir Putin. What we've seen again and again, as laid out by this investigation and other independent investigations, is that any collusion, if it took place, was between the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton and her organizations and her personal swamp in which she inhabits. We know she is the swamp creature of Swamp Clinton. That is the one with Russian ties and $145 million in rubles floating around in the Clinton Foundation, with another $500,000 going to Bill Clinton around the sale of Uranium One. This is, and I know this smacks of whataboutism, so I'm sure people are going to be sitting at home and saying, well, Jack, this is just whataboutism. The charges are on Mueller. The charges are on Mueller. Okay, right. But again, the charges from Mueller on Manafort were about Ukraine. They don't mention Russia. What instead, the thing that no one seems to be looking into today, and the entire mainstream media is bereft of, is any investigation into the Clintons' organization and efforts with the Russian state, the Clintons' organization to fund the dossier. This dossier, which was used, we're learning more and more now, by the FBI, by James Comey and others there, to open a wiretapping investigation of not only Paul Manafort, but others within the Trump campaign. As Trump famously tweeted out back in March, I've just learned that my wires were being tapped in Trump Tower. This is what I've told. Now, I've talked to a lot of sources here in Washington, D.C., and New York and other places about this situation, and there's a lot of things to break down. Why were these charges filed today? Why do they seem, and to anyone, any legal expert who's looked at this, they're saying two things. They're saying, look, number one, this doesn't match the narrative at all of what the left and what the mainstream media has been saying all year about Russian collusion. It does not match that. It matches not acknowledging certain payments for work done in Ukraine, which was years and years prior to the Trump campaign, and tax documents filed for certain real estate charges. So tax charges for real estate, again, does not fit the narrative of collusion with Russia. Plus, can someone please explain to me, first of all, what part of Russia is Ukraine in? And can they also explain to me what part of Paul Manafort's condos have to do with Russia helping Trump win the election? I'm not really sure what the connection is there. I know one of the condos was in Manhattan, and I'm fairly certain that Manhattan, even though Trump is from there, even though he's from there, they did not vote for him in any meaningful way. So these are a lot of the questions that we're going to break down today, a lot of the questions that we have, but really, what seems to be the situation is that these charges and the bringing forward of these charges, the making public of it, was brought early in the timetable because of the massive and damning revelations that the FBI had the Uranium One deal under investigation all throughout the Obama administration. They knew what Clinton was up to. They know that the FBI informant, who is due to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee very soon, is going to have damning testimony, which will likely bring up the names of Robert Mueller, former FBI director at the time, and Rod Rosenstein, who was the U.S. attorney for Maryland at the time, that looked into so much of this because one of the firms was in Maryland. So you're seeing how a lot of these players in the DOJ and FBI are tied very intimately to the Uranium One deal. And then suddenly there's this massive leak from the Mueller team to CNN on Friday night, right at the same time that the New York Times piece comes out on the Russian dossier being funded by Hillary and never-Trumper Paul Singer. Now we're also seeing a leak to CNN specifically of charges to be brought on Monday, trying to suck up all the air in the room, trying to suck up the entire conversation, change the conversation away from ties to Mueller and his financial ties that we were also learning about that he has with Russia through various hedge funds and companies that he's invested in. And we're also seeing leaks from the Mueller campaign, or excuse me, the Mueller team, to so many people. From what I've heard from my sources, is that Mueller's team was blabbing all over D.C. this entire weekend, trying to do everything they could to prime the pump for this morning's charges, which any legal advisor has looked into and said, this is really light stuff. This is basic tax issues. This is filing stuff. This has nothing to do with electioneering. It has nothing to do with collusion. They're actually not sure why the charges were brought so early. So it seems in the analysis of many that these charges were ramped up. The timetable was brought forward in an effort to change the headlines. Well, we're not going to change the headlines here on the show today. We're not going to cut it down. We are going to continue to break this down for the rest of the hour. We're going to get into a few more sources. I want to talk about Rod Rosenstein's role in all of this, Jim Comey's role in all of this, and we're going to explain just why the charges were brought today, and we're going to explain not only that, but what we can do about it. Stick with it here. We'll be right back.